So we're going to be reacting to History's Biggest Lies You Still Believe by Professor Stain.
Germany started World War I. For over a century we've been told that. Textbooks, Hollywood films and even the Treaty of Versailles itself hammered home the war guilt clause, blaming Germany alone. In reality, the war was the result of a continent-wide system of entangled alliances, secret treaties, imperial rivalries and reckless mobilization timetables that turned a Balkan crisis into a global slaughter. France actively sought revenge for the Franco-Prussian War and funded Russian mobilization. Russia was the first great power to order general mobilization, knowing it meant war. Britain had secret commitments to France while pretending neutrality. Serbia's Black Hand orchestrated the assassination of heir Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which led to Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia, which in turn led to a rapid escalation of conflicts between European powers. Germany certainly deserves blame, especially for the reckless blank check to Austria and the invasion of Belgium, but the idea that Kaiser Wilhelm single-handedly started the war was deliberate Allied propaganda that made the Versailles punishment seem justified. The Vikings wore horned helmets. This idea came from 1800s opera costume designers who added horns for dramatic effect. In reality, Viking helmets like the Järmundby were simple, practical pieces of armor, often with a nose guard but never horns, since horns would have been dangerous and impractical in battle, giving enemies something to grab onto, and the horns could get stuck on tree branches during a raid. Archaeologists have found authentic Viking helmets confirming this. The confusion likely came from horned helmets discovered in Denmark that were over 3,000 years older than the Viking era. These were ceremonial, more like crowns than combat gear. Napoleon was short. Actually, Napoleon Bonaparte's height was around 5'6" to 5'7". In modern terms,
That was short?
average or above average for his era.
Dude, he was like, I thought he was like 4'11" when people exaggerate that he was very short. 5'7"? Dude, he was almost my height. He's taller than Kevin Hart.
Myth began because his recorded height used the old French inch system, which made him seem smaller when converted incorrectly. He also appeared shorter next to his tall imperial guards, adding to the illusion. British propaganda, especially satirical cartoons by James Gillray, exaggerated his size to mock him as a small, angry man. This false image eventually inspired the term Napoleon complex, linking short stature with overcompensating behavior based on a misunderstanding.
Damn, so they just violated him for no reason. He was an average height man. And also, majority of the world is like under 5'8". Most men are under 5'8". There's like a smaller percentage of men that are like above 5'11".
The Trojan horse story, told in Greek and Roman works like Homer's Odyssey and Virgil's Aeneid, describes the Greeks hiding inside a giant wooden horse to infiltrate Troy after a decade-long war. However, no physical evidence of such a horse has ever been found, and the detailed versions were written 400 to 800 years after the supposed event. Archaeology confirms Troy was burned in 1200 BC, but not by a wooden horse. The tale was probably symbolic or inspired by real tactics, siege weapons covered in horse hides, ships referred to as seahorses, or even an earthquake that broke Troy's walls.
I thought it was confirmed that there was a Trojan horse that they sneaked in. But yeah, now to think about it, it does make sense because you have a whole army inside of a horse. And you tell me that nobody hears them and that they had enough oxygen for them to breathe throughout the night. So yeah, maybe it was a fairy tale.
Einstein failed math myth is untrue. In fact, Albert Einstein was a math prodigy, mastering algebra and geometry by age 12 and calculus by 15. The myth likely began from a misunderstanding of the Swiss grading system, where 6 was the highest score instead of the lowest as in other European countries, making his top marks look like failures. Another source of confusion came from his first attempt at the Zurich Polytechnic entrance exam, which he did fail due to weak scores in languages, history and biology, but not math or physics. Einstein himself later clarified that he had never failed mathematics. The Great Wall of China.
Dude, when was Einstein alive? Because he's the reason, he's the reason that we're so advanced in math, but dude, I don't like that most colleges for like high degrees you need to have like calculus 3. Like I don't understand the reason behind having like a calculus 3.
Can be seen from space. This myth began in 1754 when English writer William Stukeley claimed the wall was visible from the moon, and it was later popularized in a 1932 Ripley's Believe It or Not illustration that repeated the false claim. The wall is too narrow and blends with the landscape, making it almost invisible even from low Earth orbit. Astronauts have confirmed this, noting that highways, airports, and dams are far easier to spot with the naked eye. The idea persisted because of the wall's immense length and early speculation, but in reality, only special cameras or satellite imaging can detect parts of it under perfect conditions. Columbus discovered America. When Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492, the continents were already inhabited by millions of indigenous peoples who had lived there for thousands of years. Norse explorers like Leif Erikson had reached North America, likely in present-day Canada, around the year 1000, centuries before Columbus. His voyages were
Why is he not famous? He discovered Canada, dude.
limited to the Caribbean and parts of Central and South America. He never set foot on the mainland of the modern United States. Columbus also believed
He never stepped foot on actual America. There's no way that's true.
He never set foot
He was in South America and Central America, but never in the actual United States. There's no way. We have a whole day dedicated to him. Wow, I did not know that.
on the mainland of the modern United States. Columbus also believed he had reached islands near Asia, calling the locals Indians, unaware he had encountered an entire separate continent. Rats spread the Black Death. Recent research from the University of Oslo suggests the plague that killed a third of Europe in the 14th century was more likely spread by human fleas and lice, not rats. When scientists compared models of how the disease spread, the pattern linked to human parasites matched historical death rates far better than the rat-based model. This means the real culprits were likely human-to-human transmission through parasites, not the rodents long blamed for one of history's deadliest pandemics.
Time that the Black Death happened, how often did humans even shower? It was like once, probably a week. So it makes sense why everything like spread so easily. Nobody was taking a shower at all.
I hated guns. When Portuguese traders introduced firearms to Japan in 1543, samurai in fact quickly adopted and mastered them. Japanese gunsmiths began producing their own matchlock guns, improving the designs and creating tactics far ahead of their time. Warlords like Oda Nobunaga used firearms to great success by defeating traditional cavalry with organized gun formations. Firearms later declined during the Edo period, not because samurai rejected them, but because the Tokugawa government restricted their use to prevent rebellion during an era of peace. The idea of samurai rejecting guns came centuries later, popularized by films like The Last Samurai. In reality, samurai used firearms as tools of war and integrated them into their training.
Dude, just imagine you're versing a samurai, you pull out a sword, and then he sees that you pull out a sword, you just take a gun out and shoot him straight in the head. That's probably how it happened.
The Salem witch trials in colonial Massachusetts are often associated with the image of a woman being burned at the stake. They took place from February 1692 to May 1693, accused 200 people of witchcraft, convicted 30 and executed 20, but none were burned. Executions were by hanging or pressing with heavy stones. The idea of burning witches comes from European practices in countries like Germany, Scotland, and France, which later generations mistakenly applied to Salem. Roman vomitoriums. The common myth portrays the vomitorium as a special room in Roman villas, where the wealthy would go to purge themselves during a banquet feast, so they could eat more. In reality, Romans did not vomit between courses. Some maybe did, but at least not in dedicated rooms. The so-called vomitorium was a passageway in amphitheaters and stadiums. Its name comes from the Latin vomere, meaning to spew forth, describing how the passageways efficiently emptied large crowds, like the Colosseum's 50,000 spectators, in about 15 minutes. The misconception arose from later writers misinterpreting the term, and today vomitorium still refers to crowd exit passageways in modern venues. Jesus' birthday. Most scholars agree that the exact date of Jesus' birth between 6 and 4 BC is unknown. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke, the only accounts of his birth, do not give a month or season, though Luke notes shepherds were tending flocks at night, which is unlikely in December. Some traditions calculate his birth by assuming the Annunciation, the Archangel Gabriel's visit to Mary, occurred on March 25th, placing his birth 9 months later on December 25th. Other traditions celebrate it on January 6th in the Eastern Orthodox Church or in spring or fall. December 25th likely originated from early Christians and Emperor Constantine to replace pagan festivals like Sol Invictus and Saturnalia, which celebrated the winter solstice and the return of the sun to encourage conversion.
I mean, actually, there's no way we can know Jesus' birthday because births can happen earlier. And also, it's Jesus, so he can be born on the 9th month whenever he wants to pop out. That's also kind of creepy to think about because how do we know Mary was impregnated with Jesus March 25th? But then again, just having the idea of Jesus' birthday being like January 7th, it just feels weird. That's probably when he was actually born, a random date that is completely different than December 25th. But then again, I just think December 25th just feels better.
The fire of 1871 killed over 300 people and left many homeless, but the famous story of Mrs. O'Leary's cow knocking over a lantern was fabricated by a newspaper seeking a sensational tale. Mrs. O'Leary, being poor, Irish, Catholic, and a woman, made an easy scapegoat. The true cause of the fire remains unknown. Historians suggest possibilities like neighborhood boys with a cigarette, or even a meteor shower igniting fires across the area.
Meteor shower?
The humans thought the Earth was flat myth. Educated people have known the Earth is round since ancient Greece. Philosophers like Pythagoras and Aristotle provided evidence for a spherical planet in the 4th century BC, and Eratosthenes even calculated its circumference with remarkable accuracy in the 3rd century BC. The idea that medieval Europeans thought the Earth was flat is a myth, popularized in the 17th and 19th centuries to depict a supposed conflict between science and religion. Christopher Columbus also did not set sail to prove the Earth was round. His crew feared the journey would take longer than expected because they underestimated the planet's size. The Cleopatra was Egyptian myth comes from the fact that she was the last ruler of Egypt and embraced many
Cleopatra?
Egyptian customs to rule effectively. But she was of Macedonian Greek ancestry from the Ptolemaic dynasty. The idea of her as a seductive Egyptian beauty is also exaggerated, fueled by Roman propaganda and later Hollywood. Her influence came from intelligence, charisma, and political skill, not physical appearance. The story that she died
There's a good chance that she was probably mid at best.
from a snake bite is also unproven. Vincent van Gogh's ear. The story that Van Gogh cut off his entire ear in a fit of madness is untrue. He severed only the lower part of his left earlobe during a period of severe psychological distress. The act may have been triggered by a heated argument with his friend Paul Gauguin, financial pressure, and
Paul
fear of
Gauguin.
abandonment. People in the Middle Ages only lived to 30. The concept of life expectancy in ancient and medieval times is misunderstood. While average life expectancy at birth was around 30 to 35 due to high infant and child mortality, those who survived childhood often lived well into their 50s or 60s. The low average reflects deaths in infancy, early childhood, and the dangers of childbirth, not imminent death after reaching adulthood.
But I feel so bad for a woman who had to give birth before, like, you can numb them up. Like, the woman back then, if they had 3 kids, like, absolute freaking warriors. Nowadays, it's way easier, but back then, it was just pure pain. And they will have, like, 10 kids back then. Anywhere from, like, 6 to 10 kids back then. That was, like, the average of a woman.
Skeletal evidence and historical records show many adults lived long lives. And since life expectancy is an average, the lifespan metric is heavily distorted by early deaths. The idea that Galileo was imprisoned for his heliocentric model is a myth. Nicolaus Copernicus published his heliocentric theory in 1543, way before Galileo, without punishment.
I don't know.
Galileo's real conflict arose
I don't know what this guy's talking about, Galileo's heliocentric model. I don't know what this is.
because he offended Pope Urban, who had been funding his research by publicly mocking him and not following the church's required procedures to validate the model. The issue was personal and political, not purely scientific. He was found guilty by the Inquisition and sentenced to house arrest, not punishment or a dungeon. Corset
They had house arrest back then? How can you verify that back in the day? You had a guard just stand by him like 24/7. There's no way that you can actually prove house arrest. I feel like they would sneak out and come back real quick.
were torture devices. While extreme tight lacing could be harmful, most corsets back then were everyday supportive garments, similar
That's so creepy. That looks like a man, and also that waist just doesn't look real at all.
to a modern bra. They helped shape fashionable silhouettes, supported the back, and provided comfort and confidence. Only a small number of wealthy women wore them for extreme waist reduction. For most, corsets were practical clothing rather than instruments of pain. Paul Revere's Midnight Ride on April 18, 1775 was part of a coordinated effort by local patriots in the province of Massachusetts Bay to warn Minutemen of the approaching British Army before the battles of Lexington and Concord. But Revere was not the only rider. William Dawes and several others also carried warnings. Contrary to popular myth, Revere also didn't shout, "The British are coming!" Most colonists still considered themselves British, so the phrase would have been confusing. His ride relied on secrecy, using a network of riders, signal guns, and church bells to spread the alarm. The fame of Revere's ride comes mainly from Washington Irving's 1861 poem, which exaggerated his role as a lone hero. The Allies fought the Nazis to save Jews from the start. The idea that Nazis were universally opposed from the start because of their treatment of Jewish people is misleading. Antisemitism was widespread in the West before World War II, and Allied intervention was not initially motivated by a desire to stop the Holocaust. The scale of Nazi atrocities only became fully recognized once the genocide was revealed. The Holocaust succeeded in part because many countries refused to accept Jewish refugees, reflecting the broader indifference and prejudice of the time. The Library of Alexandria's single fire. The Library of Alexandria was not destroyed in a single catastrophic fire. Its decline happened gradually over centuries due to neglect, political conflict, and multiple events. Julius Caesar's fire in 48 BC damaged nearby ships and warehouses, but likely spared the main library. Later, the Serapeum Library, part of the Great Library of Alexandria, was destroyed by a Christian mob in 391 AD, and the Arab conquest in 642 AD may have caused further losses.
I remember hearing that we lost a lot of history based on that Alexandria's fire. A lot of the books got burnt down, but if that's a myth, that's crazy. Because I really thought it was a fire that set it off, but apparently that's a myth.
The library's demise was a slow process. The idea that Gandhi single-handedly freed India is a myth. While his non-violent movement mobilized millions and was crucial, independence in 1947 resulted from multiple factors. The contributions of other leaders like Nehru and Subhas Chandra Bose, armed movements such as the Indian National Army, economic and political strain on Britain after World War II, and events like the 1946 Royal Indian Navy mutiny. The story of Emperor Nero fiddling while Rome burned never happened. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD destroyed much of the city, but the violin didn't exist until nearly 1,000 years later. Historical accounts by Tacitus and others, written decades after Nero's death, combine fact with rumor. Tacitus records that Nero wasn't even in Rome when the fire began. He returned to organize relief efforts, opened his palaces to shelter the homeless, and arranged food supplies. The image of Nero playing music while the city burned likely arose as a metaphor for neglect, shaped by later writers who viewed him as a symbol of corruption and decadence. Propaganda turned a complex ruler into a cartoon villain. The pyramids were built by slaves. Archaeological evidence shows that the pyramids were constructed by paid, skilled workers, farmers, and seasonable laborers, not enslaved people. Excavations have uncovered a workers' village near the pyramids, complete with dormitories, bakeries, and even a hospital, indicating an organized community. The builders' tombs, found close to the pyramids, contained food offerings, but no treasures or signs of mummification, suggesting they were honored workers rather than slaves.
There's no way that that's true. I've always heard that it was slaves that built the pyramids, like thousands of slaves. But you're telling me that they were getting paid to do the work. I don't know if I believe that.
Studies of their remains show they ate meat regularly and suffered from injuries consistent with heavy labor, not abuse. The myth likely came from Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt long after the pyramids were built and was later reinforced by Hollywood. How and
Damn.
whether humans alone built them remains another debate.
Did they use animals to build the pyramids? I'm curious, because I'm guessing they could have used like maybe camels, but I don't know how they transported all that. I don't know how they were actually built. Like that's still a mystery. But also, there's many pyramids all throughout the world, so that's another mystery because apparently they're all aligned perfectly with the stars or something like that. I find that crazy. I don't know. Next video.